It's a familiar story of violence. Once again, Israeli forces have attacked Palestinians across the occupied West Bank in raids and direct confrontations, injuring thousands and killing scores of Palestinians in the past 2 months alone. The latest flare-up was triggered by violence from Israeli settlers towards Palestinians, who also believe Tel Aviv is trying to stop access to the Al-Aqsa compound, one of the holiest sites for Muslims around the world. In response, during this latest crackdown, Israel has claimed Palestinians have tried to stab Israelis. Usually in these situations, it has been almost impossible to verify what has actually been happening. However, more and more online film evidence suggests Israeli forces have been planting the knives on their victims, many of whom appear to have posed no threat before being killed. In this video footage, an Israeli soldier walks around a wounded Palestinian, but instead of helping him or calling for medical care, the Israeli soldier simply executes him. Yet, while such actions are provoking widespread condemnation in Europe, where the mood is turning against Israel, in America, President Obama recently hosted the head of the regime, Benjamin Netanyahu, raising doubts about whether America is willing to address the human rights concerns of Palestinians. Is Israel guilty of racial or religious persecution? Why has Obama refused to publicly condemn the killing of Palestinians? And what will happen next? These are the simple questions we sought to answer. Despite numerous United Nations resolutions, Israel continues to occupy Palestinian land. Not surprisingly, many Palestinians are now involved in a new uprising against the occupation. How can Israel ignore the UN resolutions? That's the question we put to the American public.
They can't ignore it. They shouldn't. I don't think they should ignore it at all.
I'm not familiar with their ignoring it, but it would seem to me that it's time for these two parties to get together and decide how to live in peace.
Trying to protect themselves, I guess that's what they would do, to ignore it.
My theory is, I wish they could all, everybody live together and peacefully.
Oh, I thought that was their land. Isn't that funny? They're occupying it? Oh, I guess I read a different newspaper.
I don't know how you can do that. I'm not in favor of them ignoring the resolutions.
I don't know how they think they can, but they seem to get away with it. And I think they have a lot of backing from the United States as well, which is a problem. And it seems unfair to the Palestinians, in my own view.
Good question. I am totally against Israel's policy. They've mistreated the Palestinian people for years. They've taken their property. They built a wall. I'm totally against the Israelis, unlike a lot of people in this country. And it's injustice that needs to be solved immediately.
I think the reason they're able to do so is because they have a tremendously powerful military, and the Palestinians do not. And the United States, which also has a tremendously powerful military, continues to stand behind them, more or less regardless of what they do.
So Israel still occupies Palestinian land, even though the United Nations has repeatedly objected to this action, leading to new Palestinian unrest. We asked our experts to explain Israel's willingness to ignore UN resolutions.
There's really two main reasons why I think Israel is in constant violation of United Nations resolutions. The first is that Israel bears no consequence for violating United Nations resolutions. One clear example is the resolution 194, which calls for Israel to allow Palestinian refugees to return to their land. This resolution took place in 1948, and for 7 decades Israel has been in violation of that, but there's been no consequence for Israel. And the other reason is that America is Israel's greatest attorney on the international stage. So despite constant violation of the UN resolution, America will continue to protect Israel within the international stage, and in particular within the Security Council.
Israel's ability to respect or disrespect UN resolution doesn't come from the power of Israel as a state. It comes from the states that are supporting Israel without any regard to any other countries, especially the United States, because we know that if there was a resolution that was passed by the UN General Assembly and the UN Security Council, but the US vetoes it, it's not there, it doesn't come to effect. So if Israel or the whole world says that killing 522 children is a war crime, and the United States says it's an act of self-defense, then the world acts on that basis, that it's an act of self-defense.
The latest uprising follows Israeli settler violence and Israel's latest bans on Palestinians' right to worship at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, one of the holiest sites for Muslims. Is this persecution on grounds of race, religion, or both? We asked the public.
My own opinion, it's probably religious. It's not racial.
Both, I would say. Both. Yeah. That's my opinion.
That's kind of a loaded question. I don't know what I don't know what the purpose is. I know that there's dispute over the same ground there. There has been since biblical time, and there probably always will be going forward. Unfortunately, that's the reason our only hope is to somehow get leadership in Israel and elsewhere that can work together and have a total ceasefire that'll be meaningful.
I'm not familiar with what's happening there.
Probably both, or religion.
I'm not familiar exactly with what you're asking about. I mean, I understand the question, but I don't know the specifics. I'm sorry.
I'm not familiar with that, hon. I'm not.
On both, yeah. Well, I think the freedom of religion is very important, and as much as one person might not think that another's religion is correct or whatever, you have to allow people to worship how they wish.
The Israelis talk the big talk about doing all their great religious activity, and then they turn around and ban Palestinians and Muslim activity in regards to religious that's hypocrisy.
Should the prohibition of Palestinian worship at the Al-Aqsa Mosque be regarded as racial or religious persecution? We put that to our experts.
This conflict morphs depending on the time and period. It's both religious and also racial and national. The difference is that Netanyahu is very careful how he packages the conflict. Sometimes he will package it as a national conflict, sometimes it's a religious conflict. At the moment, the Israelis and Netanyahu in particular package this conflict as a conflict against radical Islam, when it's got nothing to do with radical Islam. It's really an occupation of the Palestinian land. So the packaging of the conflict it changes over time, but if anything, it's morphed into more of a religious conflict because there are powerful blocs within the Israeli political landscape, which is turning this into a messianic conflict, which has almost gripped the Knesset and become more of a theological conflict, even though Israel claims to be a democracy, but it somehow meshed theology and democracy into one thing. So it's both religious and it's both ethnic as well. So that's my view on this.
Well, Israel is the only country in the world that explicitly demands a purely Jewish country. So Israel as a state, as a system, is built on discrimination. Even within the Jewish community itself, there is a discrimination between like Western Jews and Eastern Jews. So the whole situation in Israel, the whole mentality of the Israelis is based on discrimination against people from other races, from other religions. So I would say it's about everything, and what proves that is many attacks on Palestinians in the past few days were based on how they look, and there were a few mistakes where they attacked Arab-looking Jewish people and killed them because they thought they are Arabs. So they would attack people for their religion and for even their race, and everything is possible in Israel, as a racist to say, as a state built on apartheid and discrimination.
Analysts say the third intifada, or uprising against Israeli occupation, has begun. What will happen next? Here are the predictions of the public.
I think probably the situation will continue as it has been. There's one thing about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's been going on for many years, and there are times when I have tuned in on the news relating to it in order to see the developments that are happening. And it looked basically as it looked before, a part of a cycle that just keeps on cycling. And then I tune out. And then years later, I tune back in and I see that the same situation is there. So it's not, there's no motion.
It's a shame that anyone should be attacked in the street. It's a shame that there isn't a more civilized way to sit down together and say, we live next door to one another, we live among one another, it's time to sit and talk and find a solution. This has been going on far too long.
You know, I think that both of the sides think that the same land is sacred, and I think they both have a point. So I wish that there was a way that they could coexist. I don't blame either side.
Hopefully everybody will get some clear heads and get along with each other. You know, stop all the violence, stop all the killing, and everybody just work as one.
Well, more violence is on its way. Unfortunately, I don't know how to solve it except that whatever they're doing right now, all sides, it's not working, and it hasn't worked since 1947. So something else needs to be done.
Well, the hatred is because it's Netanyahu, as in the Israeli Orthodox community. Most of the people in Israel are secular, but the small minority are hateful of the Palestinians. There's going to be more stabbings and more woundings until the Israelis step up and finally admit their mistreatment of the people of the Palestine and treat them like human beings. It's pure and simple.
I think anybody's guess is as good as mine. I wish for peace, but I can't predict what's going to happen at this point.
What is the view of our experts regarding the likely developments in this third intifada? How far will it go?
Whether it's a third intifada or not is not really an issue. Palestinians have been resisting Israeli occupation for many, many decades now. And currently, we've had many decades where Palestinians have peacefully resisted Israeli occupation and violence, whether it be in Berlin, in Jerusalem. We've had many, many Palestinians, hundreds of Palestinians who went on hunger strike, but without any change on their reality on the ground. So what's happening now, the increase in violence, is really an outpour of frustration, outpour of disempowerment of Palestinians. So this sense of disempowerment, this desperation is what we are seeing on the street. So there is a chance, there is a potential that this could actually escalate and become more violent. But let's remember, this is a result of many, many decades of desperation, of peaceful resistance, which has not bared any fruits for the Palestinians. And if anything, Israel has increased its occupation, increased its brutality towards the Palestinians, and this is the result of the decades of repression.
I wish I could be more optimistic about this, but with everything that is happening in the world, especially with the terrorist attacks in Paris, the third intifada has little or no chance of getting enough international attention that will press Israel to stop its brutality and its oppression against Palestinians. It even might give Israel a chance to increase its brutality against Palestinians and force them to going back to the first situation where they started from, and even worse, because no one now cares about what is happening in Palestine if the attention is towards other issues in the international community, like the issue of immigrants and of course the issue of Paris attacks.
The latest European move requires Israel to label products made in its illegal settlements. While the mood in Europe is turning against Israel, why is the same not happening in the US? We put that to the public.
I think it's a very complicated situation, and while I don't think it helps to continue to build more settlements. I'm not familiar enough to know what else is involved, but it is no doubt in my mind time that these two parties sit down and talk in earnest.
I don't know. I think that they need to be held to a standard. I think it's dangerous for us to take sides. You know, I think that they both have legitimate claims and that we should try to be neutral.
I don't know, it's a silly thing to have happen like that. And I don't know about the people who have the quality to set that up and do that. I don't understand that at all.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
I think there's just a very powerful political lobby for Israel in the United States. Always has been very vocal, very influential in the corridors of power. And a lot of the politicians of all parties here seem to be terrified of criticising Israel's actions because of the voter base that the pro-Israeli lobby has in America.
Because we have a situation in the U.S., if you speak out like I am, you get all this, you're accused of being anti-Semite, and when you're not, and you can't justify your comments. There's a big lobbyist organization there in D.C. area, it's been going on for years, AIPAC and the rest of them, and their propaganda.
I think because of the history that Israel and the United States has together since the formation of Israel in the mid-'70s, I think that's the reason.
I think, again, it's a political thing here. I don't think people want to take sides on that as much as people in Europe do.
Well, the main reason why America will not have a similar approach to labeling goods from settlements, because the boycott and divestment sanctions movement is much, much stronger here in Europe than it is in America. In Europe, you have a very strong and powerful boycott movement, which America does not have. And what we have in the labeling is a result and a consequence of many years of campaigning by non-governmental organizations, human rights organizations, which has called on the EU to at least, at the very minimum, label products coming from settlements as settlement goods so the public can make a choice, informed choice, as to whether they want to boycott or not. Obama himself has actually said the labeling is the right thing to do. Even though they will not do that, the American government will not do that, he said it's the right thing to do because what we are boycotting is goods from settlement, because settlements are not part of Israel. So that's as far as America will do in terms of supporting, but I don't think they will have a similar law or policy to actually label goods coming from settlements as settlement goods. They will not actually do that.
Well, as a Palestinian who's been to Europe and to the United States, I saw how the media is working in both regions. And I can confidently say that the media in Europe is a bit more informing, is actually trying to be non-biased between like the Israelis and the Palestinians. So you have this feeling that the European public is more well informed about what is happening in Palestine than, for example, in the United States, where the Israeli lobbyist, the Zionist lobbyist, is very in control of the American media, and that results in people being less informed about what is happening in Palestine.
Israeli forces shot over 2,600 Palestinians in October and have killed scores of Palestinians in the past 2 months alone. Why did Obama not condemn this when he hosted Netanyahu earlier this month? The public had this to say.
That's a good question. I think that's wrong, and it should not be allowed for Israel to do that. That's just as bad as Osama bin Laden doing what he did in New York and at the Pentagon. It's the same thing as genocide, and it shouldn't be allowed.
This is not any different than the ongoing situation that's been there for decades. Why would he would bring it up now if he had a specific political reason to bring it up now, but apparently he didn't. It's not as though this is something that's wildly different from the way the relation has been operating for years.
Well, because, Israel is the biggest friend of the United States over there, so.
Well, personally, I don't know what he said to him out personally, but maybe he didn't say it out loud. He could have mentioned it, but I don't know what went on behind closed doors.
He has a way of not addressing very many issues, and that's what bothers a lot of people. He just seems to just keep going forward, and whatever happens, he just changes the subject to climate change or something like that.
That's a good question. You'd have to ask the president. Again, I think it should have been mentioned.
I don't know. I think that Israel and the United States, I think that the United States views Israel in a friendly light. But I do think that people in the United States very openly criticize Israel when they believe it's necessary, and I believe we're getting to the point now where it's very confusing to the American people.
With an ever-increasing Palestinian death toll, you might expect public disapproval from the American president. Why did Obama remain silent when he met Netanyahu recently? Our experts shared their opinion.
One of the main reason, as I said, why the USA will not condemn Israel for this kind of atrocity that's taking place in Jerusalem is, as I said, America behaves like Israel's attorney, Israel's lawyer on the international stage, and it will not condemn Israel for its brutality. That's the main reason. And the other reason is that I think even with a critical Obama administration or any American administration that is critical of Israel, they have learned not to go into a public spat or a tug of war with the Israeli government, especially someone like Netanyahu. Because over the last 8 years, Obama has been humiliated on the international stage. On occasions after occasions, he's been humiliated. So I think Obama has realized that he cannot win a public spat or a tug of war against Netanyahu, and that's why he has remained silent, and silent to actually save his face and not to be embarrassed. So that's really the main reason why Obama has not really said anything.
One can notice that the American politics and the American media is good at taking things out of context. So if you tell an average American citizen that there are a group of Palestinians taking knives and stabbing Israelis in their home, Israeli citizens, Israeli old persons or children, they will feel morally obliged to condemn such acts because for them it's an act of violence. It's you cannot justify that. But if they look more closely at the larger picture of the circumstances that led Palestinians to such desperate acts of violence, they would understand the context from all of this is coming from, and they will try to work on eliminating the situation that led Palestinians to that, the oppression, the discrimination, the checkpoints, everything that a Palestinian is going through under occupation. And instead of condemning Palestinians and calling them terrorists and violent people, because they are desperate, they have no choice, and the world is giving them no choice, not even attention.
The conflict in Palestine has once again reached an alarming level of violence. The United States still insists on allying itself very publicly with the occupier, Israel, and this has done nothing to calm the situation. As long as the US continues to support and fund this growingly unpopular regime, Israel will feel free to continue with its violent oppression in Palestine.